Hi Sugar Snaps. I have several drop spindles I want to share with you today and how to spin on a drop spindle, as well as reviews of several drop spindles I made myself, and I'll be sharing the tutorials of how you can make those over the next couple weeks. So be sure to check out my channel regularly to see those. If you like fiber arts and want to learn more about how to spin, yarn, weave baskets, natural dye, and other fiber arts, be sure to give this video a like because it helps me make more and better videos. Now I want to show you how to spin on a drop spindle. This drop spindle is more of a professional drop spindle. I bought this at a fiber shop. It's well made, it's finished, it has some woodwork designs in the top, in the whirl. This is the drop spindle that I use when regularly spinning yarn. Definitely you can start out by making your own or even continue to use them as you make yarn for projects. Let's start out by setting up a drop spindle, and I'll start by using this clay whirl spindle. You'll want to have some yarn, a pair of scissors, and a bit of fiber to work with to practice this. I have some basic merino fiber. This is a lightweight, smooth fiber, wool fiber that's pretty easy to spin with. You can use any type of fiber to do this, but I suggest using a wool, especially when starting out on a drop spindle or spinning at all, because wool is the easiest to work with compared to like a cotton or a silk, which is just more slippery and works through your fingers more quickly, which makes it harder to spin when you're starting out. So start out by cutting off a piece of yarn that's about 12 inches long, so about a foot long. And in one end, you're going to create a loop, so fold it over, pinch it at about 1.5 inches, and then loop that around your finger and pull that loop through to create a little knot with a loop. So an overhand knot with a loop on the end. And now we'll put the drop spindle through that loop and bring the loop up to the whirl here at the top, and then put your finger on the loop as you turn the whirl so that the yarn begins to wrap around the base of the whirl. And just a quick note on spindle anatomy. This round part at the top is called the whirl. There's a hook at the top here, obviously it's called a hook, and then your spindle staff, which is the stick coming out of the whirl that you'll be winding the yarn around. So wind it up until you have enough of a tail that you can bring it up the side of the whirl and wrap it around the hook twice, and then have a little bit of excess to hang. Now, again, you're going to want to create another loop at this end of this yarn by folding it over and creating a loop, tying it off so you end up with a loop on the end there with a little knot. Now you can also leave the end of your yarn just straight without tying a loop into your yarn if you want to attach the yarn to attach the wool that you're spinning to the end of the yarn without a knot, without the bulk of the knot. I find this is the easiest, especially when starting out. Just gives you a little bit more stability. There's a couple things to practice when preparing to learn how to use a drop spindle, and the first one is the practice of rotating the whirl to wind up the yarn. And you can see I'm catching the yarn on the whirl, or on the spindle rather, and then winding it up, and so my yarn becomes shorter and shorter as I wind it up. So practicing this hand rotation, and you can hold it in whichever hand you want. I'm right hand dominant, so I'm going to roll with my right hand. So practice that wind up with this yarn because it'll help you in the next steps to know or to have a feel for how to wind up the yarn quickly. So just go back and forth winding up and then releasing and winding up like so. Okay, the next thing to practice is spinning the spindle, and I'm going to let out some excess so I have a bit more length. Wrap it around the hook, so I'm wrapping it once and then twice, and then lifting up here. And I'm going to stick my finger through this loop so that I have a good hold of it. Hold on to the loop here. And then once you have a grasp of your loop, you're going to take your dominant hand, or the hand that will be spinning your spindle, and grab it with 3 fingers and your thumb. So I've got a pinch hold like so, and I'm going to spin the spindle like that so that it rotates around, and it'll start to slow down and stop, and then it will start to go backwards and undo all of the twists that you've just put into your yarn. And you don't want that to happen when you're actually spinning yarn, because you'll end up without having spun any yarn. So you'll want to bring it to a spin, and then right before it starts to go the other direction, catch it and spin it again and let it spin. And right before it starts to go right there where it starts to go the other direction, you want to catch it before that point. So let's let it come undone. Since I'm just spinning yarn here, I need to bring some of the twist out. So I'll give it a twist, let it rotate, and catch it right there where it starts to wobble. And if you're going to add more twist to your length of wool, you can twist it again. And if you're ready to wind it onto your drop spindle, you'll take it off of the hook and wind it onto your spindle like we did earlier. So that is how to add the twist to the yarn that you are spinning. Now, another technique to practice before setting up your drop spindle to spin is drafting the wool. And drafting wool is where you're pinching some of the wool and pulling it out, and then going further up the length of wool and pinching and pulling out another length. So you end up with a line of thinly pulled wool batting. And when you are spinning, you'll be doing this up in the air with your dominant hand pulling down and your other hand holding the length of the roving, of the wool roving, so that you can pull and then pinch at the base of where the wool is coming out of your hand, so that the twist doesn't end up all up into your roving and cause a huge mess that you have to untwist and untangle. So you'll pull down and then you'll pinch it, so pinching it off to eliminate that twist coming up, and then release and pull down with your other hand, and then pinch again, and then release, pull down and pinch, and release, pull down and pinch. And so as you're doing that, as you're creating this bit, it will be spinning and adding twist to it and creating a nice fine piece of yarn. Now, as I'm teaching you this, what the yarn that I will be creating is probably going to be fairly fine, because I've been doing this for a while, and my fingers have just adapted to creating a fine yarn. The yarn that you start out with will probably be thicker, and it will feel better to go thicker because you'll have more control, you'll have more fiber to twist. It will be more sturdy and it won't break as easy. So I suggest going a little bit thicker when you are starting out. And eventually your hands will get the feeling for it and you'll be able to do finer yarns. But enjoy the time that you have to do the chunky yarns, the thicker yarns, because there is a point where you'll have to work really hard to get those again. And we call those novelty yarns, and it's fun art yarn that you can use for cool projects. You lose that ability at some point. You'll have to learn some other techniques to be able to get that back. So it's not a curse, it's a blessing. Just roll with it and allow yourself to make that chunky art yarn right away as you're beginning, and you'll work into the finer yarns eventually. Okay, so let's set up our drop spindle to do some spinning. Now, again, let's put some of those techniques together that we just worked through. So you're gonna hold down that loop so that it's steady, so that it starts to wind up onto the spindle. Wind with your dominant hand, and then bring it up the side of the spindle and wrap it around the hook 2 times so that you have a bit of length coming up above the hook. And that's how your drop spindle will hang. Now, the loop at the end is made so that you can take it and you can take a piece of wool, pull out a bit of wool from your roving, and thread some wool through that loop like so, and I'll do it with the red so that you can see what I'm doing. So I'll take a little tuft of the wool from the end here and I'll put it through this loop of yarn so that I have some wool coming out on both sides, and then fold it up and you'll spin that together to catch the two together. So hold it up here, and the end of your roving you can fold over your hand so that it doesn't get caught in what you're spinning and it's out of your way, like so. Okay, so here's how you're gonna hold your spindle. You're pinching that overlap where you folded it over here between your fingers. This is the hand that you're going to be spinning the drop spindle with, like so. And then you're going to come up here, pinch at the base of where that yarn is, and then pull down a little bit and then release. But anytime your spindle starts going the opposite direction, you need to catch it or else your yarn will start to slide down and break because the twist is coming out of it. So spin just a little bit, pull down. There's some more yarn. Give it a spin. You're gonna pinch and pull, and then pinch this hand, and then add some spin. Pull with your dominant hand, and then pinch with your roving hand. Spin, pinch, pinch, and there's a length of yarn. Now untwist from your hook and twist this up onto your drop spindle. And then again, leaving enough length for there to be about 1.5 inches above the hook. Reposition your hands. Don't let the drop spindle untwist. And you can set it down on your workspace to start out so that it holds it somewhat steady, and pull and start your first draw while it's in rest. So you could start it on the table, draw, and then lift it up to do your first spin, if that feels more comfortable. So add some twist, release, pull with your dominant hand, and it's kind of going wonky. That's the nature of this specific drop spindle because the weight is probably off a little bit. The proportions are slightly off. So just be aware that each drop spindle is going to respond a little bit differently. So you're adding twist. Whenever it starts to stop or go the opposite direction, add twist again, and then hold it in place for about two twists with your hand or 2 spins with your hand, and then wind it up. So I'm going to start by putting my palm against the whirl so that it doesn't move, and pull a little bit of wool out to get some yarn going. Let the twist go up the yarn to kind of add some twist in there before I spin my spindle to add twist, and then pull and release, pull and release, pull and release. And I'm doing this in an opposite moving, so I grip with one hand, I release with the other hand and pull. I grip with that my left hand, grip the roving again, release with my right hand. Go move up with my right hand, pinch, pull out a bit, release with my left hand, grip with my left hand, release with my right hand so that the twist goes up the yarn. Then grip with my right hand, release with my left hand, and pull, grip with my left hand, release with my right hand, allow twist to enter. And what that looks like on the spindle, well, as the spindle is going, looks like this. So I'm gonna loop this around again. So I'm set up to go. So I'm gonna add some spin, good amount of spin, grip with my right hand, pull as I release with my left hand, grip with my left hand, let go and give it a twist, and then release with my left hand, pull with my right hand, grip with my left hand, release with my right hand. Add some twist, grip with my right hand, release with my left hand, pull, grip with my left hand, release with my right hand, allow the twist to enter the yarn. And add a little bit more twist, and then once you've reached that point, you can undo your yarn off the hook and wind it up the spindle. And so you can see I'm getting a little bit of yarn here build up at the base of the whorl. Now, a quick note on where to or how to twist it. I usually bring the yarn up to the left side of my spindle and then bring the yarn under the hook and catch it on this bottom curve here. Under the hook, catch it on that curve, wrap it around, over and under, and wrap it around and over again, and then up and under the hook here so that it's lifting up and nice and secure under the hook. So again, grip with your right hand, pull, release with your left hand, allow twist to enter, add some spin, grip with your right hand, release with your left hand, pull with your right hand, grip with your left hand, release with your right hand. So it's a dance between your fingers, allowing the twist and your hands to work the wool fiber. And this is exactly what you don't want to happen. So if your wool is kind of hanging out and you don't have a handle of it, it will catch onto the yarn that you're spinning. And to undo it, you just allow some of the twist to come out so that you can remove that wool and move it out of the way. And if you have extra that clung on, you can just pull that away as well. Like so. Okay, and then wind your yarn up and loop it around. That is how to spin on a drop spindle. Now I want to do a review of each of the drop spindles I have created and have tutorials for you to watch and help you decide which spindle is best for you to start out with. So I'll lay them out here based on kind of the difficulty of creation, or a little bit more of like the quality of the yarn that you can create. First, let's go over the CD drop spindle. For the CD drop spindle, if you have put the rubber bands on the top here and at the bottom, and you can watch that video, check the link up here. If the CDs start to spin as you rotate the spindle, then you can add some larger rubber bands here at the top and at the bottom so that it holds the CDs in more closely and kind of grips them so that they don't slide. If they're spinning as you're trying to spin, then it totally throws off the balance of your drop spindle and you won't get any spin in your yarn. So making sure that those hold steady as you're spinning your spindle is really important. So I'll set this guy up to do some spinning and go over some of the key points on this one. This is a super easy drop spindle to make because most of these pieces you can get at the craft store, the rubber bands, the cup hook, the dowel CDs. You can use old CDs or find them at the hardware or the office supply store. So I'll get started. The weight of this specific one, because I used a 1/2 inch dowel, is pretty heavy. So the type of yarn that I'm going to be able to create is going to be thicker. I'll be pulling out more fiber to get a thicker yarn here. The weight of the whorl and the spindle itself will start to pull the wool down, and it'll break your fiber and your yarn if you aren't drawing a thick enough amount of fiber, making a thick enough yarn. So make sure to kind of gauge how much fiber you need to pull as you're spinning. Based on the weight of the spindle that you're using. So this guy, I have a nice, somewhat thicker yarn. So I'll show the difference from this guy here. You get about twice as thick on the CD spindle as you do the wooden spindle. The pros for this spindle are the easy setup. It's accessible, all the materials you can get fairly easily. It's also easy to spin on because once you figure out the rubber band scenario, you can pretty quickly get set up and get spinning. A couple cons for this one are that you are kind of cornered into doing a thicker yarn because the weight of the spindle. You're having to use a thicker dowel because of the size of the circle in the middle of the CDs. So the weight is a lot heavier. So you end up with a thicker yarn. Also, getting the gasket or the rubber band to fit into the CD and hold it in place can take some work to get that working well. So just some things to keep in mind when you're working with this one. Okay, next up is our recycled items drop spindle. This guy works pretty well. He's made out of a pencil, a bottle cap, and a paper clip. You put the paper clip into the eraser at the top, and then you're ready to spin. I'll get some wool going on this guy to show you how it spins. So I have it all set up like I showed you earlier, and I'm just gonna add some wool into what I'm already spinning. Because this is a lighter weight drop spindle, it makes it easy for spinning, but also it will make it harder to get twist into your yarn. So you'll have to spin the drop spindle more times in order to get the twist into the length of your yarn, and it begins to wobble as it finishes spinning. So you have a nice spin and then it begins to wobble like this and it will stop. So you want to make sure you get enough twist in before releasing it and then winding it back up. And then you can keep going. So the nice thing about this drop spindle is that it's super easy to make. You don't really have to buy anything. You'll probably have most of these items around your house or easy access. So there's no special equipment to make this. It also spins fairly well for a beginner because it's lightweight. You won't have to worry about the weight of the drop spindle pulling the wool out of your hand and balancing those two because it's so lightweight. Another thing is that it's very inexpensive because these are mostly recycled items, and so it's very accessible to most anyone. So I like that feature because you can get started right away. It's not the prettiest drop spindle because it's made out of a bottle cap and a pencil. So it's not super fancy, it's not super classy, but it does the trick, does the job. Also, you won't spin large amounts quickly on this drop spindle because you have to add so much twist to it to get it to add the twist or get it to keep spinning. So it's a slightly slower drop spindle to work with. So there's definitely some pros and cons with this little guy. I'd say start out with it if you're just getting started in drop spinning or spinning in general, because it's really easy to make and very accessible, and you can get the handle of it fairly quickly with this guy because of the weight and the proportions. Next up, I have a wooden wheel drop spindle, and this guy you'll find in the wooden drop spindle video. This is just a little toy wheel found at the craft store, a hook and a dowel and a little bit of wood glue to attach the wheel. So again, you're setting up, we're doing a top whirl system with this one as well. Setting up your drop spindle, and let's get it going here. So I'm gonna spin. This spins a little bit longer than the recycled drop spindle, recycled piece drop spindle does, but you will need to add more twist more frequently than other drop spindles. Also, because the whirl is so small, you'll get a little bit more wobble with it, where the spindle starts to go bonkers at the end of a twist. So where it starts to do this little wobble dance like that. Another con of this drop spindle is that the sides are smooth. So when you go to bring it up the side, it can slip out of your hand along the side of the drop spindle as you're trying to get the yarn to loop around the hook. So you'll have to pinch the yarn on the side of the drop spindle and then bring it around and loop it around. And that's a little thing. You could always create little divots around the side of your drop spindle if you wanted to avoid that issue, or just learn to do the pinch method. Again, the nice thing about this drop spindle is that it's super easy to make. It's pieces that you can get at pretty much any craft store, very accessible, quick to make, just need a little bit of glue. You could use crafter's glue. I use wood glue to attach the dowel to the wheel. But really easy to make. It took me about 10 minutes total to get this set up, and then just some dry time. And the yarn that you can create with it is really nice. You end up with a nice fine yarn. Also, the weight of it is nice because it's not so heavy, again, like the recycled drop spindle, that you would you would lose control of the wool and cause a lot of breakages or drops because the drop spindle pulls the wool down too much. The lightweight is really nice. Next up is the clay whirl drop spindle. This guy is made from polymer clay and a dowel. I like this one because the weight of the polymer clay, which basically bakes into a plastic material, the weight of the whirl makes the spindle spin for longer, so you're not spinning it quite as many times. It also allows you to spin thicker yarn, so you can add more wool or pull more wool out and create a thicker gauge yarn as you're spinning. This spindle does kind of go wonky if it starts to fling out a little bit more than some of the others. But the amount of time that it spins, if you give it a good spin, is a little bit longer as well. You could experiment with making fine and thick yarns on this guy. The weight will make it harder to spin fine yarns at the beginning because it will want to pull the yarn or pull the wool out of your hand and break any fine yarns. But once you get a handle of it, you can spin finer yarns on it and it will work well. Okay, next we have the wooden spindle. This is a lighter weight than the clay, and so you can spin both fine and thicker yarns on this one, and it spins for slightly less time than the clay one does. So you'll add a little bit more spin more often, but it's a good drop spindle for when you've been spinning for a little bit and you want something maybe a little bit more balanced, a little bit nicer. It's very easy to make. These are all pieces that you can find at the craft store. So it's super accessible. It's a quick make. Check the links in the description below for links to all of these drop spindles tutorials. Okay, so out of all of these 5 drop spindles, I think my favorite would be the clay whirl spindle because the weight of the whirl allows me to play with thicker and thinner yarns, and it causes the spindle to spin for a longer amount of time without having to add spin to create more twist. All of these work really well for the beginner starting out in spinning. I would definitely say start out with this guy if you just want to experiment and try it out because it's so easy to make and it works pretty well for spinning actually. So start out with this guy and then try some of the others to experiment with other weights and other fibers perhaps. Starting out with wool, you'll get a consistency between the two if you practice with each of these, and then playing around with other fibers with the different spindles. Using finer fibers like cotton on the lighter weight drop spindles will work well because the shorter fibers of the cotton material will make this lightweight drop spindle really useful. Or using thicker, coarser fibers on the heavier clay drop spindle would work well because the weight of this whirl will make the spinning of those coarser fibers easier. Check out the description below for links to all of these drop spindle tutorials and how to make them. And give this video a thumbs up to support my channel and help me make more and better videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Happy making!